Brother Chooch thinking out loud about the end times. We're going to continue our study on how Pentecost relates to the rapture. If you haven't seen our first video, which covers reason 1 to 25, I would recommend you do so. This video is going to be reason 26 to 50. Now just keep in mind, the numbering of these particular reasons is not related to the importance of the reason. It's not really set in any particular order. You might find that reason 33 is more interesting than reason 27. The fact of the matter is that we were able, through the grace of the Lord, be able to see 50 connections of how Shavuot, which is also known as Feast of Weeks, which is also known as Pentecost, has pictures and connections and relations to the rapture of the church. So let's continue our study. Reason number 26. Enoch, as we mentioned in the last video, is a picture of the church. He's a wonderful picture of the church because he was taken prior to the flood. He was the father of Methuselah. Methuselah was the person who lived longer than anybody else in the history of the world. When Methuselah died, the floods came. So Enoch, who walked with the Lord, was taken, interestingly enough, when he was 365 years old. When I say the number 365, I believe most of you would say that's the number of days in a year. The Gregorian calendar, a full year, is 365.25 days. That's why we have a leap year every fourth year. But that number 365 has such a strong connotation to the Gentile calendar, the Gentile world, that it really just continues to fit the mold of Enoch being a picture of the church who is walking with the Lord and is taken prior to judgment. 365 days and 365 years has that Gentile flavor, and Enoch continues to fit that profile, a beautiful picture of the Gentile church taken prior to the flood. When we think of the number 50 in the Bible, we must think about Jubilee. Every 50 years, the nation of Israel was to observe the Jubilee year. This was a year of redemption. Land returned back to its original owner. Debt was canceled. It was a very important year in the Jewish cycle. When we take that number 50, we see that the number 50 is very much connected to Pentecost. In fact, Penta means 50. 50 days from first fruits, we celebrate Shavuot, Feast of Weeks, Pentecost. Again, this is the theme of redemption. Pentecost that has the theme of redemption, we can't help but think about the theme of redemption in the New Testament, which has to do with the redemption of our bodies. When does that happen? At the rapture, when we meet him up in the clouds. So we see the connection that Jubilee, the number 50, has to do with redemption, and Pentecost, 50 days, has to do with redemption. Ultimately, we believe that there's a strong possibility that if the rapture occurs on Pentecost, that will be a very significant day of redemption as well. Because the Bible is replete with numbers, numbers is highly significant in studying prophecy and other important subject matters in Scripture. When we see the number 50, obviously Jubilee jumps out. But 50 also has additional meanings. Deliverance and fullness also define the number 50. When you stop and think about the word fullness of the Gentiles, when the last Gentile comes into the camp, if you will, is saved, that will be the end of the age for the church. The church consists mostly of Gentiles. Even though there are Jewish believers, for the most part, up into the time from Pentecost until now, the church vastly consists of Gentiles. When the fullness of the Gentiles has come, that will be the end of the dispensation of the Gentiles of the church age, the age of grace. And that will usher in the next dispensation, which will be the time of Jacob's trouble. 50 is related to fullness. Fullness of the Gentiles is related to the rapture. Shavuot is the time where the Jews believe that in heaven, the fruit of the trees are judged. Interestingly enough, when the rapture occurs, the most likely soon or next event will be the Bema Seat judgment. The Bema Seat judgment has to do with the Lord Jesus judging the works of believers in order for the believers to receive their reward for their faithfulness. Now, even though it's called a judgment, the strong connotation with the Bema Seat judgment is not for punishment, but rather for rewards, just like the ancient Greek games, where a Stephanos, or a crown, a wreath, was placed on the head of the victors who came in and won a race. In the same way, the Lord will sit on his throne and give rewards and crowns to those who have been faithful. It is a time of celebration and honor and glory. This is where the fruit is being judged. So just as the Jews see that the fruit being judged in heaven on the day of Shavuot, this more than likely will happen when the rapture occurs. There's the connection. If you look at the two sections of Scripture that refers to God's instruction on what to do on the Feast of Weeks, you would have to turn to Leviticus chapter 23 and Deuteronomy chapter 16. If you closely read the instructions that the Lord gave the Israelites, the sacrifices, the animal sacrifices to perform on that particular day, you will see a contradiction. Bible scholars have debated and discussed why is there a contradiction between what the instruction is in Leviticus 23 and Deuteronomy chapter 16. One very good explanation is that there quite possibly were two times of the day during Shavuot where there would be sacrifices made, a morning sacrifice and an evening sacrifice. It's quite possible that the instructions in Leviticus chapter 23 was the morning sacrifice, and in the evening sacrifice was the instructions that were outlaid in Deuteronomy chapter 16. If that be the case, a total number of 24 animals would be sacrificed during the day of Shavuot. 24 is a very interesting number because in the Old Testament we could see that there was 24 courses that David assigned for the priests to serve in the temple, and also 24 courses of musicians to lead praise in the temple. Fast forwarding into the New Testament, we see 24 elders who are crowned and worshiping the Lord in heaven. We believe at TOL Times, amongst other biblical scholars, that the 24 elders in Revelation is representative of the church. We made a video on this, 24 reasons why we believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, which really does an intense focus on these 24 elders and why they're important in understanding that the rapture of the church needs to happen prior to the tribulation period. Regardless, 24 elders, and that number 24 has a strong connection and connotation to the raptured church, the glorified church who is now worshiping the Lamb that had been slain up in heaven. I would like to read for you a passage in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 5. It reads, "He that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame." We know that the harvest theme is such an important theme in Scripture. When you look at this passage, you see that the wise son who gathers in the summer the fruits and the grains that was being produced during the springtime is one who is wise, the one who is vigilant, the one who is preparing for the future. However, conversely, the lazy, irresponsible son who takes it easy during the harvest season is one who should be shamed. In the same way, we get this flavor in Scripture that the believer who is ready to collect the fruits of the spring in late spring, early summer, is one who is wise and one who is awaiting the promises of the Lord. The lazy, irresponsible Christian who is not ready may still be raptured, which we believe that the whole church will be raptured, but however may forfeit potential rewards at the judgment seat for not watching and waiting. Thanks to our friend at Unsealed, we were aware of one of their studies that emphasized this fascinating picture in Hebrews chapter 12. In Hebrews chapter 12, we see a picture of Pentecost. "For ye are not come unto the mount that might be touched, and that burneth with fire, nor unto blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet, and the voice of words, which voice that they heard entreated that the word should not be spoken to them any more. For they could not endure that which was commanded, and if so much as a beast touched the mountain, it should be stoned or thrust through with a dart. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake." So here you see a very clear picture of what happened at Mount Sinai. It was the giving of the law. The Lord was on Mount Sinai, and because of that very mountain, because of the holiness of God, could not be touched, neither by beast or man, or they would die. There also were some very trembling and awesome sights going on. Hearing the trumpet of God, hearing the voice of God, and even Moses himself, who spoke to God, trembled at what was going on. That's a picture that Hebrews chapter 12 is painting here. And then we see a contrast that the author brings, and that starts in verse 22. "But ye are come unto Mount Zion, and unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels." So what's that speaking of? It's speaking now that the church is called to a different mountain, Mount Zion. It relates Mount Zion as the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, that has an uncountable amount of angels. So this is speaking of the difference of where the Jews went to receive the law in their marriage ceremony, if you will. And we're going to a different mount, which is the Mount of God, which will be received much differently, very different than when the law was given. This is where we have now been fully redeemed. We received the grace of God, and we're surrounded by angels, and we're celebrating this union that we're having with him. "And to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and to God the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect, and to Jesus the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better things than that of Abel." So let me just stop there, because you could do a really awesome study in this section. So you just have to picture this, the importance of how we've been speaking on how the encounter on Mount Sinai, when the Israelites received the law from God, was on Pentecost, the Feast of Weeks. Now we look at this encounter that we have. It's comparing what happened in Mount Sinai to the believers' future collective gathering at Mount Zion, which is Heavenly City, New Jerusalem, where we will have this encounter with God. The connection is striking. Will it possibly be that on a Pentecost, either this year or in the very near future, that we're going to have God's people gather at the Mount of God for what will be a tremendous time of blessing and celebration? If we look at a passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, we find an interesting picture. In 1 Corinthians 16, starting at verse 7, "For I will not see you now by the way, but I trust to tarry a while with you, if the Lord permit. But I will tarry at Ephesus until Pentecost. For a great door and effectual is opened unto me, and there are many adversaries." So think about this. If Paul's a picture of Christ, right, he's telling the church at Corinth that he has a desire to go with them and spend time with them, tarry with them. But yet, he said that he would tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost, because there was a great opportunity there for him to spread the gospel, even though there was a lot of adversity. So think about this. We're in a time where the gospel is being spread. And Christ, if you will, is obviously heading the charge of that with the Holy Spirit. The church is the vehicle that's being used. But there's going to come a time where Jesus himself will leave the place where he's reaching out to people, even though there's a lot of adversity, because the door is open still in the age of grace. But Paul, maybe just like Jesus, will be moving and traveling and fellowshipping soon with the church at Corinth. So is there a picture here of the timing of this? Paul said he would tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost. Will the Lord tarry in reaching out to the lost world in the age of grace, during the age of grace, until Pentecost? And then from that point forward, go and engage in fellowship and reside with the church at Corinth. Let's look at a passage in Acts chapter 20, the story of Paul, and the story where he was preaching till midnight and Eutychus fell asleep and fell out of the window. And we sailed away, this is verse 6, and we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and came on to them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days. And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. And there were many lights in the upper chamber, where they were gathered together. And there sat in a window a young man named Eutychus, being fallen in a deep sleep, and as Paul was long preaching, he sank down with sleep and fell down from the third loft and was taken up dead. And Paul went down and fell on him, embracing him, said, Trouble not yourselves, for his life is in him. When he therefore was come up again, he had broken bread and eaten, and talked a long while, even till break of day, so he departed. So here's a story where Paul is speaking to these men at Troas. And he's preaching, and obviously these Christians are hungry, and they're learning, and they're growing from Paul. They're believers. And this young man, Eutychus, fell asleep while Paul was preaching, because Paul was preaching for a long time. Just as some of you out there in YouTube land may fall asleep when I'm showing some of my videos. But anyways, Eutychus falls. Now, keep in mind that they were gathered in the upper chambers. We talked in our first video about upper room and the significance of that. So here we have one who has fallen from the third floor, hit the ground and died, obviously. And Paul comes down and brings him back to life. And then he's taken care of and fed. You can see a little picture here of symbolically what's happening during the church age is that there's a gospel that is being preached, and that those who believe and fall asleep will not just lay in the grave. Jesus will be the next person to greet you if you sleep in the Lord, if you die. And Eutychus fell. He was a believer. And Paul restored him, and he opened his eyes, and Paul was the first one he saw. Paul's representative as the apostle to the Gentiles. And Christ used him to give us the good news. So what's interesting is shortly thereafter this miraculous event, he went on and he traveled. If you look further in the chapter, it said that in verse 15, and we sailed thence and came the next day over against Chios, and the next day we arrived at Samos and tarried at Togolilium, and the next day we came to Miletus. For Paul had determined to, listen to this now, for Paul had determined to sail by Ephesus because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hastened, if it were possible for him, to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost. So what's going on here? Paul is leaving. He's continuing on in his missionary journey. But he has a deadline. And the deadline is he wants to be in Jerusalem for Pentecost. Okay? Is there a connection there of that? Again, looking at the age we're in, the gospel is being spread. The church is growing. Christ is building his church. This is a time where the door is open. Salvation by grace. All are welcomed. But there's an appointed time, just like Paul had an appointed time, where he wants to celebrate Pentecost in Jerusalem on Pentecost. And so I'm not saying that he didn't preach the gospel in Jerusalem during Pentecost, but there was an appointed time that he wanted to be in that holy city to honor and worship the Lord during the Feast of Weeks. In the same way, I believe that the Lord may have set a timetable where Pentecost may be the time, the day or the time zone of when the Lord has on his calendar where we will gather, we will be in Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem, if you will, on Pentecost. Birthdays and deaths are significant times in everyone's existence. We're born into this world, and there comes a day when we leave this world. Of course, we at TOL End Times, we believe that we're a special generation that will not taste death because we're expecting the harpazo to happen in our lifetime. But there are two people who are believed to be born and die on Pentecost: King David and Enoch. Enoch, we talked about already, is a picture of the church. It's believed that he was born, even though this might be extra biblical material to come to this conclusion. It's believed that he's born and taken, not died, if you will, but taken by God on the day of Pentecost, picture of the church. King David also was believed to be born and died, physically died, on Pentecost. What's interesting enough with David is that he's connected in his lineage with Ruth and with Jesus. Ruth was born before David. Jesus was born after David. But they're all in the same line. Ruth is certainly a picture of Pentecost. And we know that the connection with Jesus has very much to do with resurrection. Seems like Enoch and King David are beautiful pictures of Pentecost, considering their birth date, the day that Enoch was taken, and the death of David. The Feast of First Fruits and the Feast of Weeks are inevitably connected. The Feast of First Fruits, we saw that the high priest presents a wave offering, the first fruits of barley. This was on the same day that the Lord was raised from the dead. They coincide at the same time. Jesus resurrected from the dead. If you look at the Feast of Weeks, we see another first fruit is presented. Even though it's processed bread, had leaven in it, was presented before the Lord by the high priest, it's still a presentation of first fruits. Because there was a resurrection connection between the barley and the death and resurrection of Christ, will there not be a connection between the presentation of the 2 loaves and another resurrection? The first feast, the Feast of First Fruits, had to do with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. This particular feast, the Feast of Weeks, has to do with the resurrection of the church. 2 feast days connected, both presenting a first fruit, both connected to a resurrection. The Apostle Paul made clear of his main ministry in the book of Romans. Book of Romans, chapter 15, verse 16. He wrote, "Then I, Paul, should be the minister of Jesus Christ to the Gentiles, ministering the gospel of God." So that was his main commission. He is minister of Jesus Christ to the Gentiles. What is he ministering? The gospel of God, he calls it. Listen to this, that the offering up of the Gentiles might be acceptable, being sanctified by the Holy Ghost. So what do we have here? We have another picture of the offering up. It's like a picture of the wave offering. Paul, whose ministry is to preach the gospel, present the good news to the Gentiles. And here, unlike the Jews, the Gentiles, for the most part, many were receiving the message and getting saved. And from Paul, the church just took off, and even to this day has been growing. The Lord Jesus Christ has chosen Paul to bring forth this gospel of grace to the world, to the Gentiles. He said that his desire is that so that the Gentiles could be offered up like a wave offering. When will that happen? It will happen when Jesus Christ comes for the church. The church has been formed, and when each individual that makes up the church is saved, they're entering into a process of sanctification. The Holy Spirit's working within us to make us more holy, set apart, more Christ-like, so that we can be presented as a holy, acceptable sacrifice, holy, acceptable offering, lifted up before God. We have this beautiful picture of the church being presented as a wave offering, the Gentile church. When does the wave offering take place? It's most beautifully connected with Shavuot. On the 3rd day has significance in Scripture. When we hear the word on the 3rd day, obviously we think immediately about the resurrection of Christ. He was in the the grave for 3 days, and on the third day he rose again. Also, on the third day, there's another connection. On the third day, the Lord in his early ministry went to the wedding at Cana. There was a wedding on the third day. Also, in Mount Sinai, when the Israelites were about to receive the law, it said that on the third day in the morning, Moses ascended Mount Sinai to have the encounter with God and also to receive the law. On the third day, we saw a wedding, and on the third day, we saw a resurrection. So on the third day has a connection of wedding and resurrection. Sinai on the third day, again, this is a picture of a wedding ceremony, if you will, with the Israelites and God. God giving them the law, which is the marital contract, the huppah being the cloud covering Mount Sinai, and this wedding vows that were made. The Jews said that they would obey everything that the Lord commanded them to do, and the Lord put a stipulation that they would be blessed if they followed all the commandments. This was a ceremony and a wedding between the Israelites and God. On the third day is connected also to Pentecost, because Sinai, what happened at Sinai on Pentecost, and what happened on Pentecost with the church, and perhaps a future day when the church is taken, perhaps on Pentecost, we can see the same theme of resurrection and marriage. One of my favorite passages in the New Testament, and a passage that we closely associate in this channel with the timing of the tribulation and the end times, and also a very popular passage where people would recognize that it has to do with the times of the end, would be in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 32. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When the branch is yet tender and put it forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh or near. So, in this channel we talk a lot about the parable of the fig tree, but I just want to focus on the aspect that speaks of summer is near. Okay? In this passage, summer has to do with the events of the tribulation period. And so as we consider the fig tree, which is Israel, and we consider its branches becoming tender and the leaves sprouting, this is an indication that springtime is here and summer is coming very soon. Summer has to do with judgment and testing. Springtime has to do with the fig tree about to start to produce. It's gaining life. It's planning on producing fruit. When we think about summer being mentioned in relation to the tribulation period, there is no other feast day that comes closer to summer than Pentecost. The first 3 feast days are clearly in spring, and the last 3 feast days are clearly in fall. It's only Pentecost where we would categorize that as late spring and early summer. So this particular verse mentioning summer as being the time of tribulation, we can see that Pentecost is positioned most closely to summer. The Jews recognized that a marriage took place between them and God at Mount Sinai. During Shavuot, many Jews will study and read Torah throughout the night. This time is called decorating the bride. As a bride prepares herself to meet her groom, obviously even to this day, there's great preparation that is done. The gown and makeup and all the things that go into a bride-to-be preparing to meet her husband. This is also recognized by the Jews as a form of preparing for this engagement or commemoration of the marriage between God and the Israelites. We know that at the rapture, the same thing occurs. But God himself, through Christ, has been preparing a bride, decorating the bride, if you will, with a strong emphasis on his word, washing us clean, and helping us develop and grow in our walk with the Lord to be more like him, and develop in character and fruit of the Spirit. His bride is truly ready to be harpazoed. Will it happen on Pentecost or in the Pentecost season? We don't know for sure, but we do see the parallels of a bride being prepared and decorated. For Israel, late spring, early summer is a great harvest season. In fact, wheat being one of the largest, if not the largest crop that Israel gathers, there is a great time and effort and process that takes place in harvesting the grain. This particular grain, wheat, is so abundant that it has to be stored in granaries. When you see that type of picture, we also understand that there is another great harvest that's taking place at the end of the age, where Christ himself will harvest his church, the wheat, and they'll be stored in the granary, so to speak, which would be heaven. When you stop and think about the great pride that takes place in for a farmer to raise the grain through its season and to be able to harvest it, and then look at the granaries and see the plenty and the abundance of the crop, it is something to behold. We look forward to that day where the Lord harvests the wheat, the church, and we are presented and stored and collected, and probably the Lord will receive great joy in that day when he sees the abundance of his harvest. I would like to read from the book of Micah, chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. Woe is me, for I am as when they have gathered the summer fruits, as the grape gleanings of the vintage. There is no cluster to eat. My soul desireth the first ripe fruit. The good man is perished out of the earth, and there is none upright among men. And they all lie in wait for blood, and they hunt every man his brother with a net. So we can see here that Micah is sharing a word of woe, of regret, of despair. What has happened? He is comparing himself, or perhaps the people of Israel, as ones who have gone to try to gather summer fruit, but there's no cluster, there's no grapes to eat, desiring the first ripe fruit, and yet it's not available. And then relating it to the good man is perished out of the earth, and there's none upright among men. So the transition goes from fruit to good, righteous, upright men. The word gather in the Hebrew is asaph, which means to remove or take away, literally to be gathered to one's fathers at death, to perish. Comes from the Hebrew word avad, meaning to cause to vanish, describing the conditions that will prevail when the righteous saints of this age are instantly transported from earth to heaven. So we can see here that there's a correlation in this text of the good men perishing from the earth and gathered to be with the Lord. We can see that there's a connection here of what is described in Micah, verses 1 and 2, and what will happen to the good upright man when they are taken away and they are gathered at harpazo. Probably and arguably the closest friends that the Jews today have are the Christians, the believers. We know that because of God's chosen people, that Christians have through the years supported, have allied, have in many ways prayed for, encouraged, and blessed the Jewish people. When the Christians are removed from the earth, the nation of Israel will feel that effect. In fact, here's a picture of summertime, possibly the time when the church is gone, and the Jews will lament the fact that their friends are no longer present to help them. There is no good or upright man in the land. Also understanding that after harpazo and the restrainer is taken out of the way, that lawlessness and evil will abound. Will not be a good place where Israel will be, considering that they are already surrounded by their enemies. Once the Christian is removed, their greatest ally will no longer be there to support and protect them. If you consider the time of Pentecost, Shavuot, it is a time of very important harvest, which is the wheat harvest. Of all the things harvested in Israel, and every one of the 7 species is highly important. You stop and think about, if you had to pick one that is the most important, how could man live without bread? Bread is mostly derived from wheat. Yes, even though barley, when harvested, can be used for bread, it is quite a distant second from the wheat harvest and the bread that is formed from wheat. Because of this, there's an extra emphasis on the importance of this time of year and this particular harvest. Of all the harvests and how they symbolize resurrection, we can see that the wheat harvest seems to be the most significant, most substantial resurrection in all the resurrections. In the barley harvest, we can see that there were righteous Jews that were raised from their grave when Jesus raised from his grave. And we also know that there will be a harvest at the end of the tribulation period, and even during the millennial, at the end of the millennial reign, where the souls of the condemned will be raised at the white throne judgment. However, we stop and think about the most abundant, plentiful, good produce that is harvested or resurrected. It seems to be when the church is harpazoed, which those who have died in Christ and those who are alive in Christ will be raised. There seems to be a great significance of importance of the wheat harvest and that period of time where the church will be harvested. As we've mentioned before, the only time where leaven is present in a sacrifice is Shavuot. And we talked also about how the priest, the high priest, will present the 2 loaves wave offering before the Lord. Now, even though we know that leaven is in the presentation of the loaves, the leaven has been killed, if you will, through the heat of baking. Now, when that leaven, those loaves of leaven are presented, God the Father, even though knowing that leaven has been in the loaves and has been destroyed by the heat, it's still viewed as, most importantly, these are the loaves of offering. Just like when you eat a loaf of bread, you don't focus on the fact that it had leaven in it and that it rose through the dough. You are enjoying the sight and the smell and the taste of the loaf of bread. In the same way, the church was redeemed from sin. Christ paid the full price on the cross. But even after our conversion, the Christian is dealing with sin, even on a daily basis. And even though it affects our fellowship with the Father, it does not affect our salvation. But yet, the Christian is going through this process of sanctification. The Lord is working in the believer to have victory over all sin in their life and to develop strong character and more character of Christ through this process of dealing with daily sin. When we are presented before the Father, even though this whole process of sanctification and dealing with sin to try to develop more and more the character of Christ has been the reality of the church. When the church is presented, sin is not in the forefront. Sin has been dealt with. Sin has been killed, if you will, through the heat. So when the Father views the church, there is no focus on sin. The focus is on the completed process of the lives of the believers through Christ, that sanctification. At Mount Sinai, the Jews received the law. And even though the law cannot save one, we know that there was one that came who completed and fulfilled the law completely. And the embodiment of that fulfillment of the law is Christ. He is the law that has been fulfilled. No man has been able to keep the law completely. The only one has been Christ. Because Christ is the fulfillment of the law, the church will receive the fulfillment of the law in the embodiment of Christ at the rapture. So, in Mount Sinai, on Shavuot, the law was received. Will the church receive the completion of the law on Shavuot? On Pentecost, those who were filled with the Holy Spirit were able to speak different languages, languages that they had not prior studied or learned. In fact, those who were in the room, who were in various parts of Asia and other regions, were able to recognize the dialect and tongue that was being spoken. This was definitely a miracle of the Holy Spirit. As one knows, it would take many years to learn a language, certainly to learn a language fluently. But these men and women were able to speak a different language without prior study. That was a miracle. And on the day of the rapture, when the Lord gathers his church from various countries, various regions, various races, who speak various languages, we will be caught up and brought together in our heavenly place and be able to speak a different language in which we had not prior learned, a heavenly language, if you will, that we will understand from each other. What that language is, we don't know yet, but we will be able to communicate with each other and understand each other with God's divine heavenly language that he will give us at the time when we're gathered together in one place. At Pentecost, there may have never been another time where such power has been endowed to God's people than on that day. We could see that there was a manifestation of the Holy Spirit, literally tongues of fire over the heads of those who were filled. They were able to speak in different languages, and they were given great power. And obviously, looking through the book of Acts, the church was able to do some amazing things because of that endowment of power that was given on the day of Pentecost. When we are harpazoed, and we will be changed, and we will be then glorified with the Lord, it will be another day of great endowment given to the body of believers. There's an account in the book of Acts on Pentecost of an explaining away of what was occurring. It had to do with the speaking in tongues. When these people heard from various parts of Asia, surrounding regions, their languages being spoken of by the apostles, they said that they must be drunk. They must be given to wine to be able to do this. They were quickly exhorted by Peter, saying that one who drinks does not drink in the morning. They were obviously not filled with wine, but filled with the Holy Spirit, and were able to do something miraculous. The same time, when we stop and think about what will happen at the rapture, there will be another explaining away, if you will. Where did everybody go? Why are Christians gone and not others? There will be an explaining away. We know that there will be a delusion at that time. There will be the man of perdition will probably come on the scene and try to explain with a lie what just occurred. But we know that that's not the truth that's being spoken. The reality is, just like on the day of Pentecost, there was a supernatural work and power of the Holy Spirit, and that's the true explanation of why these people have been changed. When we're changed at the rapture, the reason being is it's the power of God and no other logical explanation. I would like to read a section of scripture in the book of Acts. This is a section that explains what happened after Pentecost. It's in Acts chapter 2, and it's verses 42 to 47. And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread, and in prayers. And fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done by the apostles. And all that believed were together, and had all things in common. And they sold their possessions and goods, and parted them to all men, as every man had need. And they continued daily and with one accord in the temple, and breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart, praising God and having favor with all people. And the Lord added to the church daily such as should be saved. So if you look at this section of scripture, it's very clear that there's a strong emphasis on fellowship and unity, togetherness. Possessions now were not looked at as these are mine and these are yours. It was now looked at as collectively these are ours. The whole church ate together, shared their possessions. If there was a need, it was taken care of. There was an equality and a sharing and a heart like never before. It was tremendous time of fellowship and unity. That happened right after Pentecost and continued through the early church. Today we live in a time when the church age where we are not seeing that, at least to the extent we did in the early church. However, during our reign and time with the Lord, we're going to have that level of fellowship and unity, shared possession and wealth, and fellowship like never before. This is going to happen after Harpazo. If Harpazo happens during the time of Pentecost, we're going to see a repeat of what happened to the early church. The early church came together, received power, and enjoyed great fellowship. When we are gathered in the clouds and we're given and transformed and given the power of God and fully redeemed, we will experience eternal fellowship like never before. I would like to read to you an account in the book of Acts of a miracle that Peter performed. It starts in Acts chapter 9 and verse 38. And forasmuch as Lydda was nigh to Joppa, and the disciples had heard that Peter was there, they sent unto him 2 men, desiring him that he would not delay to come to them. When Peter arose and went with them, when he was come, they brought him into the upper chamber, and all the widows stood by him weeping, and showing the coats and the garments which Dorcas made, when she was with them. But Peter put them all forth, and kneeled down, and prayed, and turned him to the bodies, and said, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. And he gave her hand and lifted her up, and when he had called the saints and widows, presented her alive. So do we have a typology here? We see Peter, the man of God, was called and presented Dorcas, who was a sister in the Lord, who had done great works, who was very caring and loving, knitted clothes and other things for those who were in the church who had need. And she had died, and she touched the heart of all the widows because of her kindness and because of all the things that she had done. And she was in the upper chamber. It's mentioned in Scripture, so it has to be significant. And we talked about earlier in the last video and in this video of the significance of the upper chamber. It's a picture, if you will, of heaven. So here's Peter rising up to meet Tabitha, who has spiritually fallen asleep, or others of the world would say she has passed, she has died. And Peter prays, and she's restored to life. In the same way, we and those who have died in Christ, or who are alive when Christ comes, will be restored by Christ in the upper chambers, if you will, in the sky, in heaven. We have that great time to look forward to, being reunited and re-encountered with those who have died in Christ. If you have a loved one who died in Christ, this is the day, the rapture, when their new spiritual body will be joined with their soul and spirit, and they will have the vessel that they will be occupied in for all of eternity. Tabitha, who was dead, was brought back to life and restored in the fellowship with her brothers and sisters for whatever amount of time the Lord had appointed for her stay to be on earth. It seems to be a clear picture of what will happen in the future, perhaps in the time of Pentecost, during the time of the rapture, for sure.